it's a dysfunctional country in so many ways, but there are some ways in which the functionality seems to be excellent. There's been quite a bit of activity on the internet, in social media, I think all over the world, with the exception of the US, on what happened in Ohio. I have here with me today Einar Tangen. Thank you for coming, Einar.
It's a pleasure to be here.
On a macro basis, of course, I would just interject one thing. President Biden talked about $1 trillion infrastructure program, and that this $1 trillion infrastructure program is supposed to address the problems of dilapidated and really backwards and really, I think, in terrible condition, the infrastructure in America. And this train wreck actually demonstrates that, because with this train wreck on a macro basis, I looked at some numbers. Apparently, there are hundreds of train accidents in the US every year, and many people die from it.
Unfortunately, we're talking about a very serious subject. Basically, what you had happen is there was a 150 car train which was going towards Pennsylvania from Ohio. It was carrying everything from frozen food to hazardous chemicals. It derailed. And unfortunately, during the derailment process, about 50 of those cars, 1/3 of the cars, were compromised. And they had to, some of them, about 11 of them, were carrying toxic materials, especially this kind of vinyl chloride, which is used in the making of plastics. Very carcinogenic. Basically, there was a fire. They had to have a controlled burn of the substances. Mike DeWine, who is the governor of the state of Ohio, made a statement when it happened, and he said, "Look, don't breathe. Get out of there. You know, you're facing death." 8 days later, he's saying it's fine to go back home. But even since that time, residents have been very angry. They have not been able to meet with the corporate representatives of the Southern Rail, which is the owner of the cars and railway line. They do not know what causes the derailment. The suspicion was initially on a faulty axle on one of the trains. And they have real questions because they continue to have severe side effects from this. Everything from burning eyes, problems with breathing. They see dead animals in the street, basically birds falling from the sky. 3,500 fish were killed. People have been asked to continue drinking bottled water because 2 streams were actually contaminated, and those flow into the Ohio River. Now, to give you some sort of idea of what we're talking about, one of these rail cars that's carrying dangerous chemicals is about 30,000 gallons of that. So if you multiply that times 11, 330,000 gallons, that's, a huge amount. It's about the same as an Olympic-sized swimming pool. So releasing that into the environment, these are highly concentrated and very dangerous. So at this point, lots of questions.
It's really sad. Apparently, I was looking at the map. From Ohio River, somehow it gets to Niagara Falls. The Ohio River goes to many places, tributaries all around. So potentially, this toxic material can really spread around. Aside from the fact when you burn, the solution of burning it out, creates even more toxic gases that can spread even further and faster all over the country, if not the rest of the world.
And, obviously that smoke, toxic smoke, was drifting over Pennsylvania and affecting people there. There are people who are complaining about breathing problems and issues with pets, etc. So, this is not something where it just kind of goes away. These toxic chemicals some of them are what we call forever chemicals. They're very difficult to get rid of. They get into streams, water, the soil. As I said, they will have long-term repercussions until they're dealt with. So, yeah, there's a concern. But I mean, this overall, when you start contrasting this with the way that China has handled COVID, I mean, China went the extra step to make sure that its people were put first, that safety and lives were preserved. Whereas in the United States, it seems that, yes, it's a capitalist nation. And unfortunately, the larger you are, the more special treatment you get. So, I mean, it's kind of a circular logic in which there's very little room for the interests of people. So, you're starting to see a very marked difference. And I don't know if the American public realizes it, but when they start looking later this year at the way that China was able to handle COVID while growing its economy, while protecting its people and saving lives, I think there's going to be some sort of awakening. And they realize that their governments, despite their desire for it to be the best system, are not delivering the best results. And that's not just the United States. That's a lot of countries throughout the world, especially those who are democratic. It seems that during crisis, they sometimes lack the ability to deal with the hard issues. Instead, people want to hear somebody saying, yes, everything's going to be fine, just vote me into office and I will magically cure everything.
Now, why is it that if it happens in Ohio and potentially spreading to many other parts of the country, the government, the federal government in Washington, is not directly involved in addressing this potentially a big disaster for the whole country? I saw in some of the social media an interesting picture, and this picture is what the railroad looks like in the United States, at least in some part of the United States today. The rail is all twisted. It's therefore not at all unusual for trains to flip and derail if it's like this. Of course, immediately there are those who send pictures saying, no, that's not how it looks. It's straight, but it looks like the wood is from 100 years ago or more than 100 years ago. It's all wooden. At least what we see in China today, it's all cement and steel, not wood. So this must be from a long time ago. I've seen a governor of the state of California came to Beijing, I think more than 10 years ago, and talked about asking the Chinese to help build a high-speed rail between San Francisco and Los Angeles. And my joke to his chief of staff was, the Chinese built your railroad in the 1800s. Now you want them to build it again. So I think what we have is a situation where the railway, or a large part of the railway, especially that goes west to the West Coast, is still that built in the 1800s with Chinese coolies, as they call it. So it's sad. This country, United States, the wealthiest country on earth, with the most number of billionaires and trillionaires and so much wealth created in the financial markets, couldn't afford to upgrade its infrastructure.
Well, actually, it is. The EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, has been on the ground. They have been monitoring. There are real questions. Why the shoddy work on these cars that allowed them to derail, whatever the issue was, whether it's old rail cars or old rails that have not been kept in shape. The people want to be protected. And they deserve to be. I mean, there was $1 billion package, in the usual parlance of Washington, they divided in half and then half again, and then added pork, projects that would benefit specifically very powerful senators and congressmen. And what they get is something that neither addresses the issue and just, in essence, adds to the deficit. So once again, leadership has failed them.
No, when you have issues like this, for example, COVID, when it broke out in Wuhan, it was a national effort by the central government to organize a response in a coordinated manner. But in this case, EPA detests. Of course, the local population continues to see dead fish and dead birds, and even pictures I saw of a dead fox all over the place in Ohio. But doesn't the central government have something to do with addressing the problem instead of just sending EPA for tests?
Remember, the United States is not a top-down government. It's a bottom-up. Each level tries to reserve to itself as much power as it can. And the states themselves, it's the United States of America, and that conveys that these states consider themselves to have quite a bit of power over what goes on in their state, and it becomes very, very political. And as a result, that interferes with the federal government for doing it. But don't be fooled. Federal government is happy to pass on this. They don't want to get involved. Why? Because then it's their responsibility. Any decision they make, they're either going to alienate the powerful interests of the corporations, or like Norfolk Southern, or they're going to alienate the people. So there's no win in it for the government unless they can show some leadership.
If you tie that into some of the conspiratorial theories that's been floating around, including in the US, is that they don't want to have distractions from all the stuff about Ukraine, all the stuff about balloons in China, and Blinken's threats against China, and so on and so forth.
Well, I'd argue the other way, Charles. I think the balloons and Ukraine and things like that are, in fact, the distractions. Basically, you had Biden get up and give his State of the Union address in which he talked almost entirely, 95% was about domestic issues. But what is he doing there? He has divided Congress. He's, in essence, a lame duck. He's trying to avoid that by saying he's going to run, whether he does or not. He has to do that. But what can he do? Washington is dysfunctional. It is very, very convenient to have balloons and wars and conflicts and value issues and starting trade wars with friend, foe, and neighbor alike. To distract the public, to make them sense that there's something greater to be afraid of than the incompetency of their government.
Yes. And here's a case of the incompetence that's actually been there for a long time. Because I recall, and I'm sure you do, you're of the same age category as I am. Do you remember talk about how US has to bring its infrastructure back to a modern age? More than a decade ago. It's been a long, long time that we've been talking about it. Just like how they've been talking about guns, how they talk about fentanyl and drugs, how they talk about social and economic disparity in the society. They talk about it and talk about it. And now Biden has $1 trillion infrastructure program. I don't think it's going to get done. What do you think?
No, I mean, he's been trying. I mean, it just can't be done in Washington. There's no way that the Republican House, they control it, will allow a $1 trillion package to go through for two reasons. One, how would you be able to fund it? And the Democrats would not agree in the Senate to take it out of social services. And as a result, it's in deadlock. Unless you're willing to put it on the national debt, and the Republicans aren't, you're not going anywhere. So yes, you have a president who's unable to answer the needs of the country. But it's not. There are so many issues that are dividing America in terms of policies, hot button issues, whether it's the guns or abortion, immigration. I mean, what they're doing is, here's a nation of immigrants that are demonizing anybody who wants to come to their shores. I'm sure that they would not have appreciated it if it was their grandparents who at the time were trying to come to America. It's a dysfunctional country.
Yes, Einar, you're right. It's a dysfunctional state. It's a dysfunctional country in so many ways. But there are some ways in which the functionality seems to be excellent. For example, how for the government to control media in the distribution of news. For example, how the news media basically didn't cover the potential risks and the damage to the population that would occur from such leakage of poisonous gas and water. Even an incident occurred in which, when the governor was giving a press conference, a reporter was pushed to the ground and arrested for asking questions, or as some would say, making too much noise. So functionally, they seem to be quite good, the media, I mean, in fulfilling the wishes and desires of the government and promoting what the narrative is for those who are in the governor's house or the White House. And we've seen that plenty of times of late, including on the balloon incident, the way it was covered. It's as if the media really believe this is going to lead to World War III for a balloon that is for weather purposes, weather monitoring purposes, and that is civilian use, including 3 more that's shut down just a few weeks later. Apparently, according to one news channel, belonging to some balloon clubs. So spend $2 million to send out to fire a missile at something that is supposed to cost $120 used for recreational purposes. And the media really did not cover this and covered it as if China is about to invade the United States with drones, with all kinds of things. It's really sad how functionally they seem to work very well in detracting the attention of the population from what is wrong, what problems there are in the United States, and also China bashing. They seem to be quite good at it.